The Grand Palace, New York City's most exclusive restaurant. Daniel Morgan, 31 years old, waiter, blue uniform, serving the powerful. But 3 years ago, civil engineer, MIT degree, promising future. Then his daughter Emma got leukemia. Age 4, his wife left. Couldn't handle it. Daniel sold everything, house, car, grandfather's watch. Works 2 jobs now, painter by day, waiter by night. 4 hours sleep, $18,000 a month. For Emma's experimental treatments. That Thursday night, he was serving tables. Then he saw her. Elegant woman. Corner table, alone. 3 men in suits. At the next table. Started harassing her. Comments about her body. What they'd do to her. Predatory smiles. The woman tried to ignore them. But Daniel saw terror in her eyes. Then one man got too close, leaned in, whispered something in her ear. She went pale, trembled, tears forming. Daniel didn't think. He abandoned his tray, crossed the restaurant, planted himself at her table. 3 words, leave her alone. The restaurant went silent. The men turned, threatened him. Then the woman stood, introduced herself. Jessica Reynolds, Reynolds Industries, $18 billion empire. She was the CEO. What happened next changed 3 lives forever. Daniel Morgan never imagined that one night of work as a waiter at the Grand Palace, the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, would forever change his life. That Thursday night, while serving tables to pay for the medical treatment of his 7-year-old daughter Emma, he saw something that froze his blood. 3 men in suits were harassing an elegant woman sitting alone at the corner table. They weren't touching her physically, but their words were cutting like blades. Their smiles predatory. The woman, whom Daniel didn't know was Jessica Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Industries empire, maintained an appearance of control, but her eyes betrayed terror. When one of the men got too close, whispering something in her ear that made her pale, Daniel didn't think twice. He abandoned his tray, crossed the restaurant, and pronounced 3 words that would unleash an unpredictable chain reaction. Leave her alone. What happened next would prove that sometimes a gesture of courage changes the destiny of the one who performs it in ways he couldn't imagine. Daniel Morgan was 31 years, old and carried life on his shoulders like a slab. Every night he put on the black uniform of the Grand Palace and transformed into the silent shadow that served New York's powerful. 3 years ago, he was a civil engineer with a promising future, but when Emma got sick with leukemia, he left everything to dedicate himself completely to her. The girl was 7 years old and fought the disease with a courage that broke and inspired her father's heart. The experimental treatments, not covered by insurance, cost $18,000 a month. Daniel had sold the house, the car, every valuable possession, and now lived with Emma in a small rental apartment in the Bronx. By day he worked as a painter, by night as a waiter at the Grand Palace. He slept 4 hours a night but never complained. Emma was all he had after his wife Sarah left them when they discovered the diagnosis. She hadn't endured the weight of the illness, the prospect of years of treatments, the uncertainty of the future. That Thursday night, the restaurant was especially full. Businessmen, politicians, entertainment figures. He served in an environment of ostentatious wealth that Daniel knew well. He was used to seeing people spend on one dinner what he earned in a month. At the corner table, under the soft light of crystal lamps, sat a woman about 30 years old he had never seen before. Brown hair pulled back in an elegant bun, black dress that spoke of class and power. She ordered little, seemed more interested in her phone than the food. There was something familiar about her, but Daniel was too concentrated on work to remember where he had seen her. The night proceeded normally until they arrived. 3 men about 40 years old, expensive suits worn with arrogance, the air of those accustomed to taking what they want without asking permission. They sat at the next table and began what seemed like casual conversation. But Daniel, who was serving in the area, immediately felt something was wrong. The 3 talked among themselves, clearly addressing the woman. The comments started subtle, veiled, almost courteous. Compliments about the dress, observations about her beauty, questions about why she was dining alone. The woman maintained control, ignoring them politely, but Daniel saw the tension growing in her body. Her shoulders stiffened, her hands gripped the glass, her gaze searched for escape routes she couldn't find. The men's tone became more aggressive. They began explicit comments about her body, about the fact that a woman like her shouldn't be alone, about what they would do to her if she came with them. Words pronounced with false smiles, but with eyes that promised much worse. Daniel felt his blood boil in his veins. He remembered Sarah. He remembered how Emma felt when some classmates made fun of her for the illness. He remembered every time he had seen someone take advantage of another's weakness. The breaking moment came when the most aggressive one stood up and approached the woman. He leaned toward her, putting a hand on the table to trap her, and whispered something that made her pale and tremble. Tears began to form in her eyes, contained with titanic effort. Daniel didn't think twice. He abandoned his tray, crossed the hall ignoring the looks of other customers, and planted himself beside the woman's table. The 3 words he pronounced immediately silenced the restaurant. "Leave her alone." His voice was calm but firm, loaded with determination. The 3 men turned toward him with expressions ranging from surprise to indignation. The most aggressive straightened slowly, asking in a threatening tone who he was to allow himself to interfere. Daniel responded without lowering his gaze that he was someone who couldn't stand bullies. The woman had clearly asked to be left alone and they should respect her request. The atmosphere electrified. The other waiters stopped. Customers stopped talking. Even the pianist interrupted the melody. Daniel knew he had crossed a line, that he had challenged 3 apparently important clients, risking his job. Without that job, he couldn't pay for Emma's treatment. But looking at the woman, her eyes full of gratitude mixed with surprise, he knew he had done the right thing. Sometimes in life, there are moments when you must choose between security and dignity. Daniel had chosen dignity. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. The 3 men looked incredulous at this waiter who had dared to challenge them in front of the entire restaurant. The most aggressive man, Richard Tavani, heir to a family of construction developers, took a step toward Daniel, threatening to have him fired with 1 phone call. That's when the woman intervened. She stood slowly with a grace that spoke of years of education at the best schools. She was more imposing than she seemed sitting, with a bearing that revealed habit of command. She introduced herself with a firm voice. Jessica Reynolds. Reynolds Industries. The name fell in the hall like a stone in water. Reynolds Industries was one of the largest industrial conglomerates in America, a $18 billion empire. And Jessica, at only 29 years old, was the CEO after inheriting the company from her father. Richard Tavani's face paled. The Tavani family had contracts with Reynolds Industries that represented 70% of their revenue. Daniel saw the arrogance melt like snow in the sun, replaced by evident concern. Tavani stammered that they didn't know it was her, that it was just friendly conversation, a misunderstanding. But Jessica looked at him with ice-cold eyes, repeating with surgical precision every offensive phrase they had pronounced. She was a woman accustomed to forgetting nothing. She ordered the 3 men to leave the restaurant, announcing that their contracts would be re-examined. The 3 left quickly, mumbling confused apologies. When they finally disappeared, the restaurant slowly began to resume life. Daniel expected thanks, perhaps a handshake, at least a smile of recognition. Instead, Jessica turned toward him with an indecipherable expression, studying him as if evaluating an investment. She asked his name, then subjected him to a true interrogation. Why had he done it? He could lose his job, get into trouble. Those 3 had powerful connections, money, lawyers. He was a waiter. Why had he risked everything for a stranger? Daniel responded simply that it was the right thing to do. Jessica repeated his words with an almost mocking tone, asking if he believed doing the right thing was always convenient. When he replied that it wasn't about convenience but human dignity, she nodded slowly as if taking mental note, then, without saying anything else, she picked up her Hermes bag, left $120 on the table for a bill worth $50, and headed toward the exit. Daniel remained motionless, confused and disappointed. He didn't expect a reward, but at least a thank you seemed the minimum. The restaurant director approached, worried. What Daniel had done was brave but risky. The Tavani family didn't forget and could cause problems. Daniel finished his shift in silence, serving the last tables with his mind elsewhere. Returning home around midnight, he couldn't get Jessica Reynolds' look out of his head. It hadn't been a look of gratitude or contempt. It had been the look of someone calculating, planning, deciding something important. What Daniel didn't know was that in the next 24 hours, his life would change in unforeseen ways. Jessica Reynolds hadn't said thank you, because she had something much more substantial in mind. Jessica Reynolds hadn't reached the pinnacle of an $18 billion empire by chance. That night, in her penthouse with panoramic views of Manhattan, she couldn't get the image of that waiter who had risked everything for a stranger out of her mind. Sitting at the desk in her private study, she opened her laptop and began researching. When you control half of America, certain databases become accessible. What she found left her speechless. Daniel Morgan, 31 years old, degree with honors in civil engineering from MIT. 3 years ago, he was project manager for a prestigious firm. Then everything changed. Emma Morgan, leukemia diagnosis at 4 years old. The mother had filed for divorce 6 months later, renouncing any rights to the daughter. Daniel had sold everything: house, car, even his grandfather's watch. He had left his well-paying job to follow Emma in treatments, accepting occasional work. Painter by day, waiter by night, 4 hours of sleep to earn the $18,000 monthly for experimental treatments. The detail that most impacted Jessica: 3 months before, Daniel had refused a job offer in Germany with double salary. The move would have interrupted Emma's treatment, which was finally responding to the protocol at New York Presbyterian Hospital. The next day, Jessica presented herself at New York Presbyterian Hospital. She wanted to see this child for whom a father was sacrificing everything. She found Emma in the playroom. 7 years old, hair growing back after chemotherapy, lively eyes. She was drawing her father working in the elegant restaurant. Emma spoke of her father with absolute adoration. The best dad in the world, who worked 2 jobs for medicines. She told how he read stories every night, how he had taught her multiplication tables by singing, how he had never complained. She confessed that Daddy cried hidden, but then smiled at her and became strong for her. That night, Jessica made a decision that would change everything. She called her assistant, ordering all files from the engineering division. Unlimited budget. Sometimes the universe puts people in front of you who remind you who you really want to be. The next day, Daniel would receive a phone call he would think was a joke. But Jessica Reynolds never joked when it came to business. Daniel was painting the walls of an apartment in Greenwich Village when the phone rang. It was Thursday morning, 2 days after the episode at the restaurant, and he was trying not to think about possible consequences. The Tavani family really had the connections to create problems for him. The voice on the other side introduced herself as Marco Ruiz, personal assistant to Ms. Jessica Reynolds. He wanted to know if he had time for a meeting that afternoon. It was about a job proposal. Daniel almost dropped his paintbrush. A job proposal from Reynolds Industries? There must be a misunderstanding. He was just a painter and a waiter. But the number was indeed from the company. That afternoon, he presented himself at the skyscraper on Park Avenue, dressed in the only decent suit he owned. He felt completely out of place in the marble and steel lobby, surrounded by men in expensive suits and women talking business on the phone. The 30th floor was another world. Enormous offices with glass walls, contemporary artworks, impressive view of Manhattan. Marco Ruiz accompanied him to a conference room where Jessica was waiting. She was different from how he remembered her at the restaurant. Here, in her natural environment, she emanated an authority that was almost physical. She wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Daniel earned in 6 months, and in front of her was a folder with documents concerning him entirely. Jessica began without preamble. She had studied his resume: civil engineer, specialization in seismic-resistant structures, excellent grades, interesting projects before changing careers. When Daniel objected that if this was a way to thank him, it wasn't necessary, Jessica was categorical. It wasn't thanks, it was business. She opened the folder, extracting several sheets. Reynolds Industries was launching a social housing project. Low environmental impact urban centers for families in economic difficulty. They had budget and land. What was missing was someone who truly understood what the people who would live there needed. Daniel looked at the projects with growing interest. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. They were brilliant concepts, economical but dignified housing, common spaces to create community, integrated services for families with sick children. It was the type of project he had always dreamed of working on. When he asked why precisely him, Jessica was direct. The other engineers would have designed what they thought was best for the poor. He would design what someone who had lived that situation really needed. He knew the difference between necessity and luxury, between dignity and waste. The offer was incredible. Senior project manager salary, $145,000 a year. Flexible hours to follow Emma. Corporate health insurance that would entirely cover experimental treatments, his own office, and a team of 10 people. Daniel admitted his doubts. He had never managed projects of that dimension. He had been out of the sector for 3 years. He might not be up to it. Jessica looked at him with a half-smile. He had raised a sick child alone, sacrificed everything for her, worked 20 hours a day without complaining. He had risked his position to defend a stranger. If this wasn't being up to a challenge, she didn't know what else could be. Daniel felt his throat close. It was too good to be true. After 3 years of daily struggle, a door was opening. Not just for him, but for Emma. With that salary and insurance, the child would have access to the best available treatments. Jessica added that the project had a tight deadline. 6 months for the pilot project, 18 for complete realization. It would be intensive, demanding. Was he willing for that challenge? Daniel thought of Emma, of her brave smile, of the drawings she made of him working. He thought of sleepless nights, of accounts that never balanced, of the constant fear of not managing to save his daughter. He asked when he could start. Jessica smiled for the first time since he had known her. Monday morning, Marco would show him the office and introduce him to the team. As he left the skyscraper with the signed contract, Daniel couldn't believe what had happened. In 3 days, his life had changed completely. From waiter and painter to project manager of one of the largest industrial groups in America. That night, when he told Emma everything, the child hugged him tight, saying she knew he was special. And now the rich lady knew it too. But what neither Daniel nor Emma knew was that Jessica had much bigger plans for them. The social housing project was real and important, but it was only the beginning. Daniel's first months at Reynolds Industries were a whirlwind of changes. The office on the 27th floor was bigger than the apartment where they lived. The team of 10 engineers and architects initially looked at him with skepticism, but soon realized he had a unique vision. Where they saw numbers and technical specifications, Daniel saw families. He knew that a hallway too narrow made it difficult for a wheelchair to pass, that windows too high prevented children from looking outside, that common spaces should favor social aggregation. Emma, meanwhile, was responding magnificently to treatments. The corporate insurance had allowed even more advanced therapies, and for the first time in years, doctors were talking about complete remission. The child had regained weight. Her hair had grown back. Above all, she had begun to dream of a normal future again. The relationship with Jessica evolved slowly. At first, it was purely professional, weekly meetings, budget reviews, approvals. But gradually, Jessica began to show interest in aspects that went beyond work. One December afternoon, while Daniel was working late, Jessica entered his office with 2 cups of coffee. It was the first time he saw her do something like that. She asked how Emma was. Then, unexpectedly, she shared that her father had died of cancer when she was 27. It was the first time Jessica shared something personal. Daniel saw for a moment the vulnerability behind the control armor she always wore. When she said she had never had to face it alone, having unlimited economic resources, Daniel understood the implicit recognition of his value. Emma gives me strength, he explained simply. When someone depends completely on you, you find energies you didn't know you had. Jessica asked what he missed from the previous life, before Emma's illness. Carefreeness, perhaps, but he wouldn't have changed anything. He and Emma had become an unbeatable team. That conversation marked a turning point. Jessica began seeking occasions to talk with him, inviting him to business lunches that transformed into personal conversations, involving him in projects other managers could have handled. The social housing project was proceeding magnificently. The first pilot neighborhood in the Bronx had become a national model. Dignified houses at accessible prices, integrated services, green spaces. sense of community that was missing even in the richest neighborhoods. The biggest success for Daniel was when Emma, completely cured, cut the ribbon for the inauguration of the Integrated Medical Center in the neighborhood. She was the main inspiration, a place where sick children could receive excellent treatments without families having to sacrifice everything. That night, Emma made an observation that disconcerted Daniel. She thought Mrs. Jessica was in love with him. Important women didn't bring coffee to employees and didn't look at them the way Jessica looked at him. Emma was 9 years old, but had lived enough to recognize the nuances of human relationships. Daniel realized that perhaps his daughter saw things he, concentrated on work and her cure, had overlooked. The next day, looking at Jessica during a meeting, he began to notice previously neglected details. The way her eyes softened when she spoke with him, how she always found excuses to prolong conversations, the care with which she inquired about Emma. Above all, he realized something that scared him. He too had begun to feel something for Jessica that went beyond professional gratitude. She was attractive, intelligent, strong, but had also shown unexpected vulnerability and humanity. The problem was they belonged to completely different worlds. She was one of the richest women in America, he an ex-waiter with a second chance. How could they work together beyond work? The answer would come very soon, in a way neither of them had foreseen. The turning point came during the company Christmas party. Reynolds Industries had rented all of the Plaza Hotel to celebrate the year of successes, and for the first time, Daniel found himself on the other side, not the waiter serving, but guest of honor for the success of the social housing project. Emma, completely cured and radiant in a red dress Jessica had given her, was the little star of the evening. She told whoever would listen how her daddy had designed houses for families like theirs, and how Mrs. Jessica was the kindest person in the world. Daniel watched his daughter shine with happiness and health, thinking about how much his life had changed. 2 years before, that week, Emma was in the hospital for a serious crisis, and he was working double shifts to pay for experimental medicines. Now she was running among guests in a dream palace, and he was respected as a successful manager. Jessica approached while he reflected, more beautiful than ever in an elegant black dress. She had her hair down instead of the usual severe bun, and this made her less intimidating, more accessible. Daniel told her he was thinking about how much life can change in a short time. 2 years before, he never would have imagined being there with Emma. Well, Jessica responded that she never would have imagined having beside her someone who made her remember why she had started working in that company. When Daniel asked what she meant, Jessica explained that her father had founded Reynolds Industries to create jobs, to improve people's lives. Between mergers and acquisitions, she had lost sight of this objective. The project he had realized had reminded her who she wanted to be as a businesswoman. At that moment, Emma ran toward them asking why they weren't dancing. Before they could protest, she dragged them toward the dance floor where other couples were dancing to the notes of a jazz band. They found themselves facing each other, aware that the entire party was watching them. They began to dance awkwardly, both tense and conscious of curious looks. But gradually, as the music enveloped them, they began to relax. Jessica followed his clumsy movements, and Daniel realized she was genuinely smiling for the first time. While they danced, Jessica told him that Emma had confessed something interesting to her, that she was in love with him. Daniel almost tripped over his feet. Jessica continued saying that Emma was very perceptive for her age, and she had to admit she was right. When Daniel stammered a response, Jessica interrupted him, explaining she knew about the differences between their worlds. She had an empire to direct, he had a daughter to raise. She was accustomed to control, he to sacrificing everything for love. But in the last months, she had understood something fundamental. All the money in the world wasn't worth what she felt when she was with the two of them. Emma had taught her innocence. He had shown her courage. Together they had made her understand what family really meant. Emma appeared between them like a projectile, interrupting the moment to invite them to Christmas lunch. She wanted to cook Grandma's gnocchi for them. Jessica accepted with joy, if it seemed okay to Daniel. Christmas lunch in the small apartment was the most beautiful Jessica had ever had. Sitting at the kitchen table, eating homemade gnocchi and drinking wine from the co-op. Surrounded by Emma's laughter and Daniel's warmth, she realized she had found what she had always been looking for without knowing it. After lunch, while Emma played with gifts, Daniel and Jessica sat on the small sofa. For the first time, they were completely relaxed, without work pressures or attention from colleagues. Jessica took his hand, explaining that what she felt for him had nothing to do with gratitude or charity. She had fallen in love with the man he was, the father he was, the person who had made her become better. Daniel confessed he also loved her, but was afraid. He didn't want Emma to get her hopes up about something that might not work because of their differences. Jessica said their differences were their strength. She had economic resources, he had emotional wisdom. She had professional connections, he had authentic values. Together they could build something extraordinary. Emma chose that moment to sit between them, resting her head on Jessica's knees naturally. She asked directly if they were getting married or not. When Daniel explained that adults do things calmly, Emma insisted, asking if they loved each other. Jessica looked at Daniel, confirming they loved each other very much. Emma replied with childish wisdom that when you love each other, you build a family. A year later, Daniel and Jessica married in an intimate ceremony at the Plaza Hotel Chapel. Emma was the maid of honor, proud that her intuitions had proven correct. The marriage wasn't just the union of two people, but the birth of a family that demonstrated how authentic love can overcome any social barrier. Reynolds Industries, under the joint guidance of Jessica and Daniel, became a model of responsible capitalism. Their social housing project expanded throughout America, helping thousands of families. But the greatest success was Emma, who, growing up in an environment of love and stability, maintained her determination to become a doctor. At 18, accepted to medical school on scholarship, she told her parents she wanted to save children like Daddy had saved her, and Mommy, Jessica, had saved their family. Watching Emma prepare for college, Daniel and Jessica realized their meeting at the Grand Palace hadn't been accidental. It had been the moment when the universe had decided to bring together three people who needed each other, because sometimes it only takes a moment of courage. 3 words pronounced at the right moment, to forever change the course of 3 lives and demonstrate that true love knows no social, economic, or any other barriers. Like if you believe true courage is rewarded by life. Comment what moment of the story impacted you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in love that overcomes all barriers. Subscribe for more stories of families born from the heart and courage. Sometimes it's enough to say, "Leave her alone," to change 3 lives forever. Sometimes love arrives when you least expect it, in the most improbable place. And sometimes the most beautiful families are born not from blood, but from the choice to love each other every day, because true courage doesn't ask for rewards, but the universe always has a way of recognizing it.